The thing that I think was so special about Fire in the Booth wasn't only the lyricism and the lyrical prowess and sort of almost like the athletic achievement of it, but the subject matter was decidedly from a UK perspective, decidedly from somebody who grew up at the metropole of an empire that was trying to understand the impact of colonialism by the people in their neighborhood. And you weren't hearing that from New York or from Chicago or from LA or stuff like that. You were hearing a different story that rhymed, but not that story. Did you feel like I need to tell this story? This is the story that needs to be told?
Yeah, definitely. Very, very consciously, I feel like when you buy a Nas record or a Rakim record or a Kendrick Lamar record, you're buying a slice of Black American history. When you buy a Kendrick Lamar record, you know it's harking back to George Clinton and to this. And even if you don't know, it's in there.
Yeah.
With Nas, his dad was a jazz musician, right? So it's that direct. Rakim is a grade 8 saxophone player. This is not like, and you hear him talking about how he tried to rap, he's like, I was trying to rap the way John Coltrane plays. Like, I've heard him say that with my own. So there's this, even though the mainstream media tries to denigrate hip hop as an art form, there is this canon and this history and so on.
Continuity.
This continuity. With us in the UK, it's a little bit different because our influences are twin, where we've got the American bigger cousin in one ear, and then we've got the Jamaican bigger cousin in the other ear. Because as much as I grew up on Nas and New York hip hop, especially West Coast too, but really New York hip hop, I had Bounty Killer and Beanie Man and Shabba and Ninja Man and Super Cat in my other ear with the Jamaican vibe, and those sort of two avenues gave us UK hip hop and grime, gave us jungle and then the UK variant of garage, because Jamaica was always in the back here going, yeah, but I'm here too. And so I feel like, for me, I always say to people, Bounty Killer especially was as much of an influence on me in the early 90s as Nas was. He was the other MC that I looked at and had political commentary and had great songs and so on and had cultural impact. And so, like any group of people, you want to tell your story and your people's story and their experiences. And I think hip hop, as Chuck D always put it, being the CNN of the hood, I feel like we always wanted to say to our cousins in New York, look, we can relate, not just like as a gimmick because of the music, but we have some very different experiences, but some similar experiences too. And I feel like, Fire in the Booth was partly trying to achieve that. And I think partly did, where people went, oh, you have the same problems with mass incarceration and institutionalized racism and police brutality. But then there's some differences. And that's what it was trying to get at.
After the success of the earlier part of your career, you established yourself as like a real voice that's trying to tap into this story. And with that success comes access to different places. You're traveling around the world, you're meeting all these different types of people. And I would imagine that your vantage point changes and evolves. So I want to talk a little bit about that South-South solidarity, especially at a moment like this right now. I really feel like we're hitting some sort of pivot point where the nature of empire is like the Wizard of Oz curtain has fallen a little bit.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this moment of asking ourselves, like, do we have to keep on going through the center of the empire? Can we do South-South collaborations? Can we support each other? I'm curious, from somebody who's traveled as much as you have and have thought about empire as much as you have, what is the nature of how you think about that South-South?
Yeah, I think we can, we will, and we are. I also think all of the same contradictions that come out with human politics will come out. There will be South-South conflict and South-South collaboration, right?
Yeah.
Humans will never, I don't believe we're going to build a bed of roses where we all get on. But I do hope for a world where there's less war and more peace, where everyone has access to the basics of life, clean running water, healthcare, education, a decent home to live in, more time with their family. Like, I think one of the things that happens is not just more access, which does happen, class privilege, which does happen if you achieve certain things, but there's also just age. And I think at a certain point you realize you have a bit more of a tragic view, at least I have. And the reason for that is, but the reason for that isn't anything grand or political. When you realize just maintaining cordial relations with your 10 closest family members is a task worthy of the Buddha. And even the Buddha might fail, right? You don't know that when you're 22 because you
Yeah.
still get on with everybody. Then between 22 and 32, siblings fall out, cousins fall out, aunties and uncles don't get on, granny dies, and one person in the family tries to thief the money and blah, 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 and so on, right? I don't want to tell too much of my family story, but, you know, I'm sure
All
you can...
hypothetical.
Listen,
all
all
hypothetical.
hypothetical. Absolutely not naming anyone.
Allegedly.
But listen, everybody laughed, and that let me know everyone's family has some...
Everyone has that auntie. Everyone has that uncle.
Everyone's got problems. And what I realized, see, when I was young, 'cause
Yeah.
I was poor. I don't know why I'm doing poor in inverted commas. I was poor, right? I went to school without breakfast. Times was hard. Sleeping in a tracksuit. All of that stuff, right? I thought middle-class families had all the answers, and their life was so wonderful, right? Because compared to me, on paper, that seemed... Then I became an adult, and I realized that one's mum takes heroin in front of the kids, and that one does this. And that one's absent, and that's why that girl was the one having drug and other parties at her house at 13, right? So I realized class doesn't... Don't get me wrong, you'd rather cry on a Benz than in a bicycle. But that material concerns only solve one part. You need community, you need family, you need people that love you and care about you. And often, sometimes poorer communities and poorer countries have more of that than places that have more economic privilege. I mean, America and Britain would be two great examples of that. Very rich countries, a palpable lack of community compared to many other places because the way capitalism is organized in those two countries specifically, communities are constantly eviscerated, moving around the country, housing's completely unaffordable, institutions, religious and community institutions find it harder to maintain themselves and so on and so forth. And so I think that the change in vantage point from traveling, little things. I was in North Africa, right? And I noticed that Korean, this is long before K-pop. This is like 12, 13 years ago. When I say long before K-pop, I mean long before K-pop was on my radar, right? K-pop was clearly happening in Korea, right? But I noticed that the Korean government had an active program of translating their soaps and their TV shows into Darija, the Moroccan and Algerian variants of Arabic. Not even just Arabic general, the local version, right? As part of their soft power play to sell car. And I was like, that's phenomenal. Like, and you think of even today, even in the West, you've had Korean TV shows be successful. You've had Italian TV shows be successful, which sounds, even because Italy's part of the West, but Italy's treated as like...
We were talking about this morning. Yeah.
It's like the baby cousin. It's the Naples of the West. It's the hood. Like, it's like, you're just about in the G8, but we all know if you weren't a white country, you wouldn't be in the G8 no more. You'd be in some other thing.
You're about as south as you can get.
Right. But even economically.
Yeah.
Like, Italy is a rich country, but it's a small rich country.
Yeah.
And the south of Italy is not rich, right?
Yeah, Sicily is a different thing.
Right. And so I feel like if Italy was in North Africa, they'd go, yeah, G8's not for you. I mean, how is Italy in the G8 and India's not? Like, it's absurd when you really think about it. It's a country that represents a fifth of humanity. There's a nuclear power. There's a 5,000-year-old civilization. And Italy's also got a very impressive history of civilization. It's at what point does India go, excuse me, we're also a democracy, you know.
Or screw the G8.
Or screw the G8 and BRICS, right?
Exactly.
Either course is fine. I'm just saying it's.
I think they made their decision, by the way.
I think they clearly have made their decision. And I think if post World War II, if Western governments hadn't been so short-sighted, in my view, you think about the absurdity of excluding Indian troops from the victory parade after World War II. India contributed more men and resources than New Zealand, Canada, and Australia combined to the British war effort. And the British government goes, yeah, but do we really want to show the world that brown people helped us win this war? Yeah, no. And I think they thought that relationship was going to continue of just being able to tell these massive countries what to do forever and ever into the future. If they had have said, which they did with Poland, so for example, after World War II, the British government had loads of immigrants coming from Poland that the British government was subsidizing. And they actively had a propaganda campaign called What the Polish Did for You, where they started putting leaflets through people's letterbox saying, look, we know these people from Poland are coming here and you Brits, white Brits don't love them, but this is why they have a right to be here. Can you imagine they did that with people from India and the Caribbean and Africa? The whole history of post-war Britain could have been different, but also their relationship to the state of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Nigeria and all these other large economies, even if they're per capita terms poor countries, These are going to be massive economies in the future. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
I feel like that arrogance in that period made a lot of the leaders of the countries go, what? Really? Okay. And now, you know, I listen to the Indian foreign minister talk quite a lot, and I look at the way he speaks with a certain confidence. Like, listen, we're not your local cousin, you know, brother. It's not 1942. Like, we're not some new kid on the block you can just tell what to do. We've been around for a minute.
Yeah.
And you need to respect us.
Yeah.
And that sort of world that's emerging, that multipolar world, which, by the way, prior to 1500 was the world. Europe didn't
that
go...
is the nature. That is the natural order. The natural order is a multipolar, multiplayer chess game.
Absolutely. And when Europe went out into the world, this is what's interesting. For European colonialism and white supremacy to justify themselves, Europeans have had to lie to themselves about their own history. When they first went out around the world, whether it was Marco Polo or the early Portuguese in West Africa, they went, wow, these non-Europeans are doing some pretty impressive stuff. It was only after they got the machine gun and quinine, which helped Europeans to survive malaria and conquered everybody, they went, these people are rubbish. Before that, they were like, no, man, these people are on stuff. They got this, they got that, we could learn this, we could learn that. It was the arrogance of finally having conquered everybody that made them go, we've always been the best. But prior to that, they were like, they had to, of necessity, negotiate those relationships. We're now returning to a world in which the West is going to have to negotiate those relationships. Some people don't want that world to emerge, and how vicious the kickback will be is going to determine whether or not we have World War III, I think.
Yeah. What is it like in Europe right now, from your perspective? I mean, like, we're sitting here in Dubai right now.
Yeah.
We're in this moment of transition. Do you feel like people on the ground there are, from your perspective, you travel a lot, from your perspective, are people reconciling that that contradiction and saying, okay, wait a second, we need to renegotiate our relationship to the rest of the world?
I think some people are, but I'm also conscious that I have a bubble, an ideological bubble, and I try not to, of people who think similarly, are reasonably well educated, are quite worldly. I think there's also a portion, I mean, if you look at the Brexit, Farage, Tommy Robinson of it all, there's definitely a pushback against that. And there are a portion of Brits who genuinely don't realize that the whole north of England is not a rich country anymore. Like, it's a middle income country at best. Like London, one of the biggest problems in England is regional inequality. You got one major city that's responsible for like a quarter of the country's GDP. Outside of that, you're talking about a living standard similar to Slovenia. No disrespect to Slovenia, because Slovenia is not a poor. No, I'm being literal. Like, literally, the per capita income in England outside of London is about the same as Slovenia. Yet Brits have this arrogance, like as if we're Singapore or Switzerland or somewhere. And like, I have people message me all the time about shithole countries and stuff like that on Twitter. And I think, bro, like, if anything, the average working Brit today, with the cost of living crisis, with the unaffordability of housing, should be relating to people in the global south and saying, like, my parents work hard and they're never going to own a home.
Yeah.
I now get how economics beyond my control can shape my experience. If anything, you'd think the decline in living standards in the West would make Westerners go, like, so if other people are suffering, it isn't just because they're stupid and backwards and their culture's awful. Because if you're a firefighter or a school teacher or a nurse in England today, you're doing the same work you were doing 20 years ago, the same necessary and important work, and you're receiving half the reward for it. Because your wages are frozen below the rate of inflation, because houses are like 8 times the price of what they were, because basic necessities are expensive. You haven't changed your behavior. And so I think some people are having that self-reflection, but I do think it's hard for a lot of people to let go of those. Once you've been told you're superior, there is something rotten in the human spirit, and I'm not even saying I'm above it. I had a particular type of upbringing. Had I grown up a light-skinned person in Jamaica, where being light-skinned is a source of privilege and you're treated differently, as if your white daddy must be somebody powerful, even if he wasn't, right? There's a whole history of colorism in the Caribbean that is very different to being a mixed race road youth in London. I might have had some of that arrogance, because I deal with light-skinned Jamaicans, and many of them do have it, right? Because they've grown up being treated a certain way simply because their skin is lighter. And it means something different socially, and they're a separate social class. There does seem to be something rotten in us that when we get somebody to look down on, it's very hard to go, it's bullshit.
Yeah.
That person isn't worse than me. And I think a lot of us find it very, very hard to admit that our success in life, even if we work very hard, me included, by the way, is hugely related to luck. I grew up in a social housing in Zone 2 in the middle of one of the wealthiest cities in the world. A kid who lived in Middlesbrough didn't do anything differently to my family.
Yeah.
He just lived in Middlesbrough and I lived in London. A child born in the same day in the favelas in Brazil, even though I was unfortunate in a rich country, I was also extremely lucky globally. And I think lots of people seem to find it really hard to go, yeah, I'm successful, but luck played a big, and privilege in a way.
Yeah.